don't push the river, right? Like flow with it. Let yourself be carried forward by the current. And the current is, with running or goals, it's like, you have an ambition to do something and that's the current, and let that carry you rather than forcing everything. Because I think that takes the joy out of it. And I've just learned from long experience that when you have the joy for something, you run in a much more relaxed, with much more freedom. And honestly, I think you're always going to have better results that way.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Thank you to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode. Tracksmith just released their spring collection, and as a season shift yet again, I'm proud to continue this partnership with them. Tracksmith is a brand for committed runners like you and me, people who know that the best part of a busy day is squeezing in a workout. They offer products for training, racing, and rest days, which you know I'm a fan of, and create experiences that make running more rewarding, more connected, and more meaningful. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN, all one word, will receive free shipping, and 5% of your purchase amount will be donated to the Michael J. Fox Foundation to help find a cure and support those living with Parkinson's. This episode is brought to you by Performance and Recovery Labs in Boulder, Colorado. PR Labs is all about truly collaborative care between practitioners. Women-owned and women-led, they're a group of sports medicine professionals who are invested in fully supporting their clients and goals with their hybrid care option, which lets you build your own sessions. They have PT, sports massage, and chiro, and will be adding an infrared sauna and a cold saltwater plunge pool to round out their recovery options. They're cash pay and can supply you with invoices and notes to submit to your insurance company. If you live or find yourself in Boulder, Colorado, check them out and let them know I sent you. Welcome back. I have Katie Arnold joining me on the podcast today. Katie, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's super great to be here.
Of course. So first question is always a tough one. I'll let you get that drink of coffee first to prepare for it. Who is Katie?
Who is Katie? Oh my goodness. Let's see. In no particular order, or an order that changes kind of with the day. I'm a writer, runner, mother, human, aspiring Zen student, mountain lover, wanderer, seeker. Did I say runner?
That you did once or twice. That is a lot of hats. So where did I did a podcast recording yesterday and we spoke for 27 minutes before talking about running.
Oh,
and it's just fascinating how we have this thing that connects us, but so much of it is about all of the other stuff associated with running. So I want to start with the writing aspect.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, where did you get the writing bug?
I've been a writer, I think, and identified as a writer my whole life, since I was very young, probably 5 or 6 or 7. Stories are just fascinating to me. I've always been a big reader. And I think as a young girl, I was trying to make sense of my world. And the way I did that was through telling stories, making stories up about the world around me, trying to solve sort of this riddle of my life. And I write about that in my memoir, Running Home, which is my parents had separated when I was very young and I didn't know why. And sort of in the way of the 1970s, right? Children were sort of like airlifted from their lives and to put into new ones, and kids were not told things. And it's so different now. But so I didn't know kind of what had happened. And I think I was always trying to get to to solve it. I loved mysteries. I was a big fan of the kids' book, Harriet the Spy, and I sort of fancied myself like Harriet. And so that impulse to tell stories and to solve things came from a very young age. I also think my father was a huge influence. He was a photographer but also a very beautiful writer. And so I think it's just been in me from the very, very beginning.
Is curiosity a part of that?
Oh, 1,000%. Curiosity is sort of the soul of the writer, I think. And I'm just always curious. And I'm teaching my own girls who are 13 and 11, and I've taught them this and sort of modeled this when they were very young, is to move through the world just with that inquisitive mind. And sort of, when you pass someone on the street, there's a whole story in their face. Or when you see someone looking out of a window, I mean, my mind and my imagination, I could spin kind of an entire, novel from that. And so curiosity is so much the driving force. And I think has been in me since I was, I've always been curious.
Do you like airports and public places?
Oh
I
my,
feel like
that is so crazy you said that. Writing on airplanes is like my superpower. That somehow being on an airplane, airports are fine too, but airplanes, like I have to have the window seat so there's not a lot of, action. But I do some of my best writing on airplanes. I think it's that place of being in between places and kind of neither here nor there, and this state of motion, but stillness in motion, and kind of that looking down on the world, and anything is possible on an airplane. I love it. I don't love air travel, but I love writing on airplanes.
that's definitely not the way I thought you were going to go with that. So I thought you would like airplanes and public places because of all of the opportunities to connect and be curious with strangers, and to they're going to Cancun, they're going to Pocatello, they're going to
Oh, for sure.
Austin. Like what's their story? Why are they going there? What's in their face?
Yeah.
What's in their feeling?
Well, that too. So you can sort of absorb all that and digest it. But then actually on the plane, when we're all in our little rows and you're not really seeing the people around you, then you can kind of go deep into the writing. But for sure, thinking of stories, like that's something actually, I haven't thought about this in a while, that my dad and I and sister used to do when we would travel. When I was a girl, we would be at a diner or whatever, and there'd be some people at the next table, and we'd sort of, without like overtly eavesdropping or, intruding on their privacy, we would try to figure out like what their story was. And, most of the time, I'm sure we were so far off, but it was the act of invention more than anything that was compelling to us.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. It's like every single person is so unique and leads such a separate life. There's so much depth to
Yeah.
every single person that we interact with, and who knows what's going on behind
Right.
their head. And it's just fascinating to like make up the story sometimes.
Right. I mean, everyone has such a rich interior life, and yet we're all so the same at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Like we all are human and we all want to be loved and seen and understood. And the human impulse is so universal, but the details of our story are so distinct. I love that paradox.
Totally. I want to ask about something that you shared with me, the Zen of running, building an inner strength and mindfulness that's not reliant on results to validate ourselves as runners, and how when we do this, the results often follow. This is like the crux and core of the conversations I've been having on the podcast lately. And it ranges from amateur recreational runners to runners who have made it their goal to win the Olympic gold medal and then
Mhm.
done that, and everyone in between. And the consensus is exactly this: that when you focus on a goal that's in your control, so consistency or happiness or joy or fun or whatever, something that's not tangible, you're often much more successful tangibly
Yeah.
than if you were to focus on tangible goals. It sounds like you've done a lot of exploring of this concept. So I'm curious to hear from you, your thoughts. I guess we'll start there.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where my running is taking me, into this exploration of how to be more present with in our lives rather than always sort of striving or being out in front of ourselves. And it's really challenging as an elite runner or as a competitive runner with goals, right? That's the paradox is, we want and any runners like this probably has those goals that they, want to achieve for themselves. And so how do you hold the goal and yet be completely present in the process and not let the goal lead you astray or pull you out of yourself? And so I have been exploring this. And I think that really my experience with this started when I was coming back from injury. I guess it was 4 years ago now. And I had broken my leg in a pretty traumatic wilderness accident. And my orthopedist, had told me that, he didn't think I should ever run again. And so that was sort of the baseline. And then, some time passed and I found that I had been accepted into the Leadville 100 lottery. And so I had this very tangible goal of getting to Leadville healthy. And what I learned was that I never was focused on the result at Leadville. Like I never focused on, a time, a place, finishing in the top, whatever. It was always about doing what I needed to do in the moment to get to the starting line healthy. And that became this practice in showing up daily for myself in ways that would help me and facilitate that goal of getting, to the starting line healthy, but never fixating on the end result. And so that creates this kind of open-minded, curiosity, to use the word you used earlier, about if I'm showing up daily for myself, anything could happen. And I'm open to it all. I'm open to showing up at Leadville and just, I kind of call it I go into receive mode when I go to a race. If I know I'm prepared, I just kind of go in with open arms, okay, now show me. I've done my work and I've been present in my training. And now I'm open to whatever this is going to teach me. And so I call it kind of holding lightly to our goals and be willing to see that maybe the goal that we had is actually, or a detour that comes along is not a detour, but is the true path. And so the way I do that is just really building that inner strength. And I do that through meditation. And that helps me kind of always make sure I'm coming from within with my running and not being pulled out. It's so hard, or it's so easy right now, I would say, to be pulled out of ourselves, right? There's so much feedback and chatter on social media, and it's easy to get caught up in what other people are doing and other people's goals. And getting quiet for a period of time each day in stillness, and I would say running too is a meditation for me, but really actually sitting and having a sitting practice is the way that I get quiet and I can hear my own instincts and intuition to make sure that I'm still on my center line and I'm still acting from within, in alignment with my aspirations and goals.
Very cool. There's a lot there that I want to respond to, but I want to go back to a spoiler alert. You won Leadville that year, so
Yeah,
it worked.
It did work.
To those who are listening, you mentioned something that I really resonate with: holding your goals lightly. Mm-hmm. Episode 150 of this podcast with my friend Tansy, she talked about goals being like an egg in your hand, and you hold them close to your heart. But if you squeeze them too hard, they break.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
It's perfect, right? It's if you over fixate on the outcome, it's either not going to happen or it's going to be incredibly underwhelming when it does happen. And so it's this, hold it at a distance, feel it, touch it, smell it, love it, but it's there, but it doesn't need to be there in a way. It's just sort of the guiding light.
Right. There's this, I have this feeling, rather than, I know I'm on the right path when the feeling that I have within me is not that I'm chasing a goal, but I'm being pulled toward the goal, right? That the goal, even sometimes I struggle with the word goal, but say the race or the pursuit, I like that better, is drawing me forward rather than me I'm chasing my dreams. I'm going to run it down and tackle it and, squeeze the joy right out of it. And so it's a subtle difference, right? Because it's the same thing. It's showing up for yourself. It's not, this path is not like a license to be aimless or, not have direction, but it's letting yourself be drawn forward, rather than kind of squeezing it and like pushing it. I do a lot on rivers, and rivers, as much as mountains, are very powerful in my life. And I always use the analogy, like, don't push the river, right? Like, flow with it and let yourself be carried forward by the current. And the current is, with running or goals, it's like, you have an ambition, an aspiration to do something, and that's the current, and let that carry you, rather than forcing everything. Because I think that takes the joy out of it. And I've just learned from long experience that when you have the joy for something, which doesn't make it easy all the time, but when you have that joy, that you run in a much more relaxed, and the same goes for writing, with everything, with much more freedom. And honestly, I think you're always going to have better results that way.
I totally agree. I was just in Austin, Texas for a running retreat called Endeavor Run. And one of the coaches, a guy named Bertrand Newsome, runs a coaching business called Too Legit Fitness. And he mentioned something about, like, he's in it for the fun. He's there for fun. Not just like, woo, I'm going to run around and scream and have a blast, but really finding the joy in the process. And I went up to, and so we were encouraged to like really spend a lot of time with the coaches and ask them questions and marinate on things that are gnawing at us. And I have a strange relationship with racing currently. Like, I'm shying away from racing because I'm having so much fun training. And so I said to him, he's run, I think, like 50 or 60 something marathons.
Wow.
And so he's no stranger to racing. And I said to him, I was like, hey, here's my deal. I was signed up for 50K in March, and on a long run with some friends, they're like, oh, what are you training for? And it uncovered that I had no desire to run the race because I just wanted to keep doing the training. And I didn't want to change anything. I was in such a groove and feeling good and enjoying the group runs and workouts and whatever. I was like, is this a problem? and he was like, he like put his cup of water down and was like, man, I can't tell you the number of people that come to me with the opposite problem.
Oh, funny.
They're like, people come to me because they've lost their mojo and they want to find it and they want to find that fire. And he's like, you're in this unique spot where you're having that fun and the fire is there. And the racing is like, it's always there if you want it.
For sure.
And so it was just a funny dichotomy between like my experience as a beginner runner when it was all about the racing,
right,
and it was only fun if I PR'd, to I don't need it.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious for you, what's driving the fun? What's driving the joy? And how do you cultivate that?
Yeah, I think it's so important to maintain that spirit of inquiry that you just were talking about, is sort of always, investigating kind of why. Everyone loves to talk about like, what's your why, but like investigating what it is that draws us and keeps us going. And it changes all the time. I mean, for me, it's, there's fluctuations with the seasons, and like if I'm coming off a big race season, wanting to ski instead of run. And so I really just always am trying to listen to my intuition or my instincts, because, I think coaches are fantastic, but my belief is that we always have the knowing inside of us. We just don't always know what that is, but it's in us. And so trying to connect with, like, I have a saying, like, do what moves you. And I mean that literally, like, what's moving you out the door? If this month it's ski-mo and you want to be up in the mountains skiing and skinning and skiing, like, follow that, and for you, do what moves you. Like, if you want to just be out with your friends doing crazy long runs on the trails and you don't feel like showing up to the 50K start line, do that. The motor inside of us and our own knowing and is so powerful, but it gets so drowned out like I was saying before, by, our to-do lists, our responsibilities, magnified now since the pandemic, for our children. Maybe we have aging parents. Work is complex and complicated. There's so much kind of insecurity out there. But it's staying true to that voice and hearing that and allowing ourselves to follow it and to heed it and not to do what everyone else is doing. And I think that's really how I maintain the joy. And the other thing for me is that running now is such a practice in sort of holding that paradox of like having ambition, but also wanting to sort of dissolve myself in the process, right? Like to go so deeply into it that I become running. And I have the same thing with my writing, like that I become the writing, that I'm not like a separate thing from it. And that does not mean that I shut out the rest of the world or I become so self-absorbed. It actually means the opposite, that I am more connected to my world. And so running is the way I explore that. In competition, I have a complicated relationship with racing. I'm sure everyone does. But I had maybe a year and a half ago, I was really questioning, like, did I want to race? Races were starting to feel like products, not experiences. And I was questioning that. And I was on my way up to a 50K, like an early season race in March in Utah. And grappling with that question on my drive up. And I realized that like races are such a great forum for me to practice that sort of that duality, or to hold the paradox of like becoming part of something so deeply and not letting ego drive me. And if there's any great place to practice, shedding your ego, it's in a competitive race. Right? Like I can do that, all I want on my solo mountain runs, my Zen runs. But when you show up at a starting line, that's really where the practice happens. And so when I realized that, I was like, oh, that's what racing is teaching me. And that's why I'm doing it right now. And so that was an important moment just to understand. Because like you,
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, that like, if one of my goals, and sort of this falls under the Zen of running kind of umbrella, is to not be running, from my ego, but be running for sort of a connection to all beings. As a competitive athlete, that's hard to do. When you toe the line, like there's a big part of me that wants to win or wants to do my best or cares where I am in the field. And so, showing up, that is the learning edge for me as in a race, is can I dissolve my ego while still running a strong race? And what does that even look like? And how do I do that? And so that when I understood that, because I was like, I don't need to go to races. I was having a moment a few years ago, right before the pandemic, where I was like, I'm not sure racing is this the responsible thing to do for the environment? Like I could run 30 miles out my door in the mountains. Do I need to travel across 2 states to a race where they're giving out swag and like so much stuff and, and the resources required? And I wasn't sure about racing. And when I realized it could be part of that, my Zen practice, really, it became more compelling to me again.
I'm so curious about that. So you're standing on a start line, let's say Leadville 2018, which is the year that you won, and you're curious about what the next 100 miles is gonna look like, and you're trying to do it without ego. You're not thinking, I'm gonna beat her, I'm gonna beat her, I'm gonna beat her, and you're not thinking about, I must perform my best.
Mm-mm.
But you do perform your best. You did perform your best.
I mean, I can tell you what I was thinking. Do you want to?
Yeah.
I mean, so for me, driving into Leadville before the start of the race, like I had to pull over on the side of the road because seeing the mountains, I was just filled with this overwhelming gratitude that I had gotten there healthy and that I was there. And so the baseline for me that weekend was intense gratitude. like I'm crying with gratitude kind of thing, like out of, not like I've got to summon this gratitude or I'm going to have a gratitude practice. It was just that natural
Just
upwelling,
happened.
like that kind of knowing I was talking about. And that sense of openness, like, okay, at the Leadville race meeting, the day before the race, very famously, Ken, the race director, will, tell you to look around in the gymnasium and like half of the people around you will not finish. And I had a very real moment where I was like, yeah, that could be me. Like, I don't want it to be me, but that could be me. And going into it, also so open to that, knowing I had like trained, from within as best I could. And I really did feel very ready. But I didn't know who else was racing. Only like the week before had I even, bothered to sort of like guesstimate my pace, rounding up very generously and conservatively. And so I was never really caught up in that. And that I only did because I had pacers and helpers, and then just, going to the start line, I wrote 2 words on my hand in Sharpie, which was smile and flow. And I wanted to smile because, there is that sense there, everyone knows that when you smile, it makes your perceived effort less and you feel better. But more, it was just that gratitude feeling. And the flowing was the sense that I've always had when I run in the mountains, that I am absorbing the mountain's energy through my body. And it's kind of like meeting in the middle, and it's coming from the sky and up through my feet. And if I could run with that energy, it's much bigger than my own energy. Like, I'll run out of energy long before the mountain ever will. So there was that feeling that I just wanted to kind of flow with the mountain as long as possible. And my plan was, like, when I popped out of that flow, to just like hold on with my fingernails. But the truth is, like, I never popped out. I mean, honestly, I got to the finish and I was still in, like, it was, 19 hours and 53 minutes of like almost continuous flow, which far exceeded any, I never imagined that, like I didn't strategize for that. It was just, again, that thing I held lightly.
Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting the podcast. I'm proud to partner with Tracksmith, and they're going to donate 5% of your order value to the Michael J. Fox Foundation for all orders, and you'll also get free shipping. The Michael J. Fox Foundation is dedicated to finding a cure and helping those living with Parkinson's. Both of my grandfathers have or had Parkinson's, and I'm grateful for Tracksmith's support for something so personal. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN will contribute towards this donation. I have been loving their Harrier long sleeve and Alston half tights in particular. Thanks again to PR Labs for supporting not only this episode of the podcast, but my training and recovery. I've been going to PR Labs since the moment I landed in Boulder and love their chiro, sports massage, PT, and acupuncture options. They're a one-stop shop when it comes to sports performance and recovery, and all of their practitioners are so knowledgeable and are also athletes themselves. Their hybrid care option lets you build your own sessions. I love the acupuncture and massage combo. If you live in or find yourself near Boulder, check them out and let them know I sent you. I mean, that's what I do it for too. It's like the feeling of flow is one of the most powerful and one of the most incredible feelings. And you can't get that without putting in immense amounts of work. So the Austin Marathon was this past weekend, and my friend Peter Bromka ran it. Peter's a 2:19 marathoner, and he decided to run this race the day before. So for people out there who are running 100-mile races, signing up for marathon day of or the next day is, it happens. Yeah. But he still ran a 2:41. And I saw him at mile 23, and he was still, calling to the crowd and smiling. And we ran together for about a quarter mile because that was all I could keep up with him at his 5:30, 5:40 pace at that deep in the race. And he said at mile 24, I think he just started crying, like out of the flow and the overwhelming gratitude that like his body can do this, and he can just like, I'm going to have a fun long run tomorrow and, see the city and run fast with a lot of people. And He won the Masters category. And, these things that we get to do, we can be so, it can be, oh yeah, I did the work. Of course I'm going to do it. Or it's like, holy shit, I get to do this. Like,
Right.
and then have these moments of overwhelming gratitude. He said he was out in no man's land. There was nobody near him. There were no spectators, nothing. And he was just like, look at what we get to do.
Yeah.
And when you can, I'm preaching to the choir here with you, but like when you can get to a place when it's, we get to do this versus we have to do this, it's so powerful.
Right. Like our bodies are healthy. They're enabling us, like they're allowing us to do this.
Right. This morning in Boulder, it was 5 degrees below zero, and I had a workout to do. And I don't know, in the past I would have wimped out or tried to find a friend with a treadmill or whatever. And I was like, screw it. I'm just gonna get into it. And how cool is it that like we can do hard things?
Right.
And it's that balance between it's a balance. It's like, it's so fantastic that our bodies allow us to do this, that sometimes we go too far with it. And
definitely,
it's like, what else can we do? How far can we go? But I think that's the curiosity aspect. Like, really, how far can we go? Have you thought about how far can you go?
I mean, I do think about that. Before I say anything about that, I do think the other piece to the gratitude is for flow for me, is like what really primes me for flow is humility, and humility in the face of, as a mountain trail runner, like the mountains, right? And knowing I'm like but a speck in the mountains, and anything can happen. And I think that was that feeling I had at the Leadville pre-meeting that was like, half of you in here won't finish. And, rather than like, no way, that's not going to be me, is that just sort of humility, like that could be me, And so I think humility is a big piece to sort of priming ourselves to find that flow state, doing the work, coming in with like a real sincere gratitude, and recognizing that, like it may not go as planned. So
and that's the beauty of it, right? It's perfectly ugly, honestly, sometimes.
It is. Like if everything went as planned, boy, that would be pretty tedious.
And boring.
But what did you ask about? How far do I think about how far I can go? I sure do. I mean, I think about it in that way of like, well, are these super long distances right now? We're talking about like ultras, like 200 plus miles. I'm really curious about that of like, is that kind to myself? Is that necessary? Like, and I'm not, I would never speak to someone else's, right? Like we all, like I said, we all have that, our own instincts and knowing. And, but for me, if sort of looking at it, like if it's this Zen path for me running, do I need to do 200 miles? Would my body want to, like, is that kind to my body? When I hear people doing it, I'm quite frankly, like astounded and amazed. Because it feels far away to me, that kind of distance, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious. But I don't feel this like, pressing urge to like push. Again, there's that word push. Like I'm not pushing, but rather I'm trying to let my instincts lead me to where I naturally want to go. And I don't know if that's it, but I'm amazed and incredibly impressed by people who can run that far.
I had a chat with Courtney DeWalter. I don't remember the episode number, but I don't know, 50 episodes ago or so. And or actually it was last summer. Anyway, we talked about how she was hallucinating and like sweating pomegranates and kiwis and things like out of her skin.
Oh my God. That's crazy. I just like viscerally could feel that feeling of the pomegranates coming out of me.
I paced a friend at the Ure 100 this past summer, and I picked her up at 54. And by about mile 60, she saw Indiana Jones.
Oh, wow. Cool.
At the top of a mountain.
Oh
I was like,
God.
Kelly, keep eating,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about this Indiana Jones thing later.
I'm glad you were there. She could like speak aloud and you would be like, I'm committing this to memory. You will never
Yeah.
forget this. It's right.
I
Like
don't
if
let
you
her.
hadn't been there, she'd been like, did I really think I saw Indiana Jones? But you were like the witness with
Yeah.
her.
She was like, "Do you see the guy up in the?" I'm like, Kelly, put another chew in your mouth and eat it. But it's so fascinating, like where the mind goes, and the hallucination is like a protective mechanism. It's like
Mhm.
you've gone too far
Yeah.
compared to what your body and mind are used to experiencing, and this is like it's like shutting down before it shuts down and trying to scare you into stopping, because otherwise you're like you can't move any further. On the total other end of the spectrum, I'm wondering, have you run a really hard 5K
Oh my
recently?
gosh. I mean, no, I mean, no, I haven't run a hard 5K. I'm laughing because like there's a 5K at where we spend the summer every summer, and I run it with my girls, or like I'll try to run, but like that actually terrifies me. A fast road race is like far more frightening than a 50 miler to me. But yeah, never say never. I mean, anything can like, I'm so curious to like what is going to move me, and I have a race calendar, which is unlike me. You know, I don't always plan way in advance because some of that sort of feeling my way into something, you can't know that in January for the year. But running a fast marathon is sort of like I had a dream about it. And I always pay attention to my dreams, and I wrote it down. And I was like, I wonder what that means, that I'm dreaming of running, because I really don't like to run on the roads. Like I think maybe that's not a good idea for me to train for one, because I'd have to be on the pavement, but
Or
I don't
dirt?
know. Maybe. I know. Yeah.
So my first time that I went to Western States was 2018, and I hadn't launched this podcast yet, but it was a few weeks after I started thinking about it,
Mhm.
and I was so curious about these people doing this thing where they run for up to 30 hours. And with what I do for work, it's become very normalized to run 100 miles.
Mhm.
And a lot of the people in my community have done it, do it frequently,
Right.
like really frequently. and but I hadn't been to one. So 2018 was the first one I went to, and I just started asking people like 5 a.m. What are you thinking about? 4:59 a.m. What are you thinking about? And one guy was like, I'm just really glad this ain't a 5K. I'm like, dude, you're about to run 100 miles.
Only at
And
only at a 100-mile race would someone say that. Oh,
but
that's really good.
it's such an interesting reflection, right? Like a 5K is less than 20 minutes for
Yeah.
me, a 5K is ideally less than 18 minutes
Yeah.
worth of like intense.
Yeah.
It's like you're riding a razor's, your finger is on the edge the entire
Yeah.
time, and you can't go too far one way or the other. Otherwise you undershoot or you overshoot. And for me, the 5K is that perfect dichotomy of the mind wrestling with the body,
Yeah.
because I watched I forget what it was called, but it was about the 8,000 meter peaks.
Oh, the 14
Yeah, 14
peaks or
14
something?
peaks. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the guy in the movie was like, when you think you're fucked, you're only 45% fucked. And so I think about this all the time. I'm like, when you're riding that edge,
Yeah.
it's really not the edge, but it's a practice of how close can you get to like maximal discomfort and persevere, right? Like that's the definition of endurance, the
Right.
ability to endure when the cost of enduring is getting increasingly more expensive. That's not what it actually is, but close enough. I'm paraphrasing. And so I find it so fascinating, and I find the for me the 5K is the practice of finding limits. I haven't run a 100 miler yet, and the 50K I ran was like party pace,
Mhm.
and I did rim to rim to rim, which was I found my limits, or so I think, about 10 hours into that. But you can't do that every weekend.
I mean, when you say it like that, the 5K, like over in 20 minutes, like does sound sort of nice to me because then you'd have the whole day for writing and you'd be like, I just really went for it. Yeah. So maybe it's not that terrifying. Maybe I'll switch to 5Ks. But yeah, you mentioned the rim to rim to rim. Like that was another thing that I did where like I accidentally practiced that practice of having no goal and had like an insane day of just, afterwards when I got back, you know, I didn't know that I had run it the way I had, like I like stopped at the river to swim. And it was just like that joyful practice of being completely present in the effort and making a true effort. Like it was not, that I was just kind of cruising. It was, a true effort. But I was so present to each moment, like just inhabiting the run that it didn't feel effortful, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It sounds weird, but I've experienced it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not that it's effortless or it's not that it's easy, but there's a sense that there's not as much resistance. And, it doesn't always work out that way. Oftentimes you go into a run with so much resistance, mental resistance, like physical resistance, you're resisting the weather. Like, it sounds like this morning you had like that opposite of the resistance where you're just like, I'm going to give myself over to this weather. But boy, that the resistance we create, totally can suck our energy.
Totally. You said something. You were talking about how you had that experience at rim to rim to rim, and it wasn't effortless, but it was. I mean, it's like flow, right?
Yeah, it was definitely flow, and I think because I went into it without any sense of a time goal, like at all, and that's I didn't check what the FKT was. I was just running to be in the canyon. And I've done the Grand Canyon now 3 times. And each time I finish, I have the sense of like, why did I just rush across the Grand Canyon? Like where the scale of time is so immense, that basement rock in the bottom, which is like 2 billion years old, like, why did I just fly through there? Like, this is a place this is a place where time has slowed so incredibly much. And so I always feel a little foolish coming out of the Grand Canyon. Like, and I don't run on a watch very much, but like those couple times, like I knew when I had started, and I'm not that person who at a stoplight stops her watch, but when you get out of the canyon, you sort of dive up onto the south rim again. I was just like, wow, that was very unnatural to move that way in a place that's so old. So I have vowed to go back, and it's not that it's like about moving slowly, but maybe it's about moving more in time with our surroundings. And I think that's what I felt at Leadville. Like I was completely in sync with the mountains that day. If that sounds kind of weird, it's hard to explain, but to be in the canyon in a way that like honors that time and the ancientness of it, is what I want to do next. And I think I'm going to do that by, not running the standard route, but going down like the South Kaibab and up north and then coming up Bright Angel. So no part of my ego can be like clinging to like a number.
If I love that. I think one of the things
yourself sometimes, like that's what it takes.
Yeah. I think one of the things that makes the canyon, yes. It's so unique because you can see where you're going to and you can see where you've come from.
Yeah.
And so when you're standing at the south rim, you can see the north rim, and it's like objectively very far away.
Very far.
And then you move. Far. Yeah. And then you move towards it. And then there are all those false summits. Yeah. And you're like, oh, I'm there. When I did it, I ran, Anna Mae Flynn joined us, and she had done it a handful of times, I think. And she was like, when you see the white rock, you're not close.
Like, are you going to the north rim, you mean, or are you coming back?
To the south. Or I don't remember what the color was or what the rock was, but she was like, you see this layer of rock and it looks like you're about to climb out of it, but you're going to turn the corner and there's another 2 miles to go or whatever. But I loved that experience, and I loved being in the San Juans this past summer because you feel so small and it's incomparable to any other
Yeah.
place. Even when you're in the town of Ure, like you're just a little speck
Right.
surrounded by these mountains. It's very humbling. I'd be remiss to not ask about Running Home, the memoir you wrote. I'm curious your relationship with that book in particular, and what that means to you in the human experience.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Running Home is a memoir that I wrote about sort of the way I came to long distance running. I didn't mention this, but like I've been a runner my whole life. So, pretty much around the time that I started writing is when I started running. And, but was never competitive, just ran my own way. And I think that honestly that saved me. And that's why I'm running now with so much like inner joy for it because I didn't, burn myself out as a competitive runner in my teens and 20s. But my father died in 2010, and he and I were very close, as I've mentioned. He was, a real inspiration to me. And I had just had my second daughter was born, and I had this really intense sort of grief, anxiety cyclone kind of came over me, probably some postpartum stuff, and was fairly sure I was dying too. And now I know that that is not uncommon. That's not an uncommon manifestation of grief, is to sort of take on the illness or the loss of someone else and think that you're dying. But I didn't know that, and I didn't know what was happening. And so I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there's tons of natural healers here. And I'm a very open-minded person. And so I tried like everything. And nothing worked as well as running into the mountains. And again, like I've been a runner, I've been a trail runner, I had raced before this. Like this was not like a shock of the death and like now I'm going to start something I've never done. But my relationship to running became very different after my father died. And it was really how I healed myself, was going on, increasingly longer and longer runs into the mountains. And when I was running, as I write about, like I stopped thinking that I was dying. Not for long. Like as soon as I got back from the run, I'd be like, what's that crink in my shoulder? Is that like a tumor or whatever? And so it wasn't, it didn't work, as a blanket fix cure all, but it gave me relief in the moment. And so the book is really sort of an exploration about that path through grief, and very much like a father-daughter memoir, kind of also like a coming of age story as a writer. So it was really powerful to write it. I wrote a lot of it through running. Like actually, as a writer, I've always felt that my ideas flow most fluidly, like when I'm in motion. And there's this really direct connection between, when we move our bodies, we move our minds. And that was, I've always known that to be true since I was a girl. I think why I became a writer, or why I started writing and running around the same time, was that I discovered that super accidentally. I think I was out riding my bike as a 7-year-old, and I was like, oh, making those stories up when I moved my body. And so for years after my dad died, I didn't know I was writing the book, but I had been writing the book, if you know what I mean, like while I was running. And I would come home, and I keep notebooks. So some people would call them journals or diaries, but I had written so much down in my notebooks about the grief process and losing my father, just because I didn't want to forget, and not because they were for something. That was another example where I was in the process of it rather than like trying to write a book, right? And it's very similar to the approach that I have toward running, or that I try to cultivate, which is to be in the process and not fixated on the result. It wasn't for a while that, maybe a year or two after, like 3 years after my dad died, that on a run, I got to the top of the mountain that I usually run up, Atalaya here in Santa Fe, and the words running home just came to me. And of course, like when we get to if we're on an out and back run, the minute we flip it, right, and come home to start for home, we're running home. But it worked on so many levels of like running home to yourself. And that I knew as soon as I had like those words came to me, I was like, oh, that's the title. but I hadn't known I would even writing a book, if that makes sense. And so it was just an organic process of creation through movement. So that was, yeah, a really powerful experience. And it just parallels so much with my running of like just letting the action, becoming so intimate with something and not fixating on where you want it to take you.
I love that.
So let me just give a quick plug. It's out in paperback. It came out in paperback last year and hardcover before that. And so you can get it at your local bookstore. Quick plug.
Awesome. I look forward to reading it as well. Dean Karnaz has left a review that said, a must read for anyone looking for a deeper glimpse into the mindset of a fearless individual. What does he mean by a fearless individual?
I mean, everyone has fears, right? I think fearlessness is showing up despite our fears. And that's true courage. And just, willing to show up, not knowing what's going to happen. That to me is what fearlessness is. And, certainly if you were to be like a thought bubble inside my brain, you would see a zillion fears, relating to my children, my health, my husband, like we all have those, but to sort of be able to hold those and to keep moving forward. And so that to me, and that's what I learned really grieving my father, was that you could have both these almost crippling anxieties and this deep inner drive to keep going.
Amazing. Well, if people want to find you and your storytelling and meditation and writings, where can we find you on your corner of the internet?
Social media, I have a complex relationship with it, like we all do. I would say Instagram is the most reliable place. I post there. I'm at Katie Arnold on Instagram, and I'm at Raising Rippers on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook. My principle or my sort of guiding mantra with social media is just to post when I'm moved to do so. So I'm just trying to put up there things that are real and wanting to come out of me and to be shared. So go there. I'm, hope that it's of use and inspiration. I've also doing running and writing retreats, which I've got one for women, a writing and running flow retreat in late April in Santa Fe, which we have this amazing spot. It's kind of a luxury glamping retreat. And we'll be doing lots of running, really great writing practice. And we'll be doing sitting meditation as well as some sort of bonuses from my favorite teachers, including my Tai Chi teacher.
Very cool. Well, Katie, thanks so much for taking some time to chat today, and I hope we can share a run together in the mountains sometime soon.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was a pleasure. Take care.
Likewise. You too.
Okay.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.